This is the final project presentation for Introduction to Media Analysis from Group 8. Our media object we have chosen to analyze is the film They Live. As I said, our object is They Live, directed by John Carpenter in 1988. It was a pretty obvious choice. There's a lot of content that seems to match up with the themes that we have discussed over the course of the semester, albeit in a bit of a 80s action package.
The overall tone of the film is set on the struggle of the proletariat. The protagonist, Nada, who had worked in Denver for a decade, was laid off after the crash of the economy and the bank field, and then brought his own tools to join the workforce. However, the seemingly simple story of laborers' arduous efforts and their confrontation with the upper class has become an art expressed in the way of films, which is necessary and has its specificity. That is, the movie is presented in the form of the science fiction action. According to Benjamin in the work of art, like all other science fiction films that cannot be directly obtained, copied, or reproduced from reality, the technical creation of its form of movie also had a place of its own among the artistic processes. In such an artistic format, John Carpenter tried to illustrate the core conflict of the movie in a very metaphoric way, namely, the proletariat's heroic resistance to the capitalist ruling class, and also the irony of social reality. By later editing, the plot of the film development conforms to the three-act structure of expectations of the audience. In the first section, through the characterization of Nada, show the authenticity of the lower class people's living conditions and controlled ideology. Then the story starts to trigger the contradiction, that is, from the real world which is shown through sunglasses on which Nada stumbled. Finally, when the underlying resistance organization was wiped out, Nada and his friend Frank entered the inner circle of the ruling class, destroying the tools of misleading the public and covering up the truth, while sacrificing themselves. The foreshadowing of the first part occupies a full third of the time in the film, presenting the story through dynamic images and pushing the plot forward. From the second structure, the plot of the film goes into a situation that no other art form can match. The film constantly changes the different things when putting on and taking off the sunglasses, presenting them from the perspective of the audience with this dynamic and coherent expression. Because the dynamic pictures of the film are very intuitive, the audience can easily get the information that John Carpenter wants to express from these edited clips. According to Benjamin, the directives given by captions to those looking at images in illustrated magazines soon become even more precise and commanding in films, where the way each single image is understood seems prescribed by the sequence of all the preceding images.
There are many major examples of how They Live represents the ideas of Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto. This is done within the plot and the aesthetic of the film. For example, within the first act of the film, the viewer will see graffiti covering the walls. This sets the theme that there is inequality. We see our protagonist, Nada, an all-American guy looking for work, as a representation of the proletariat. Dressed in worker's boots and jeans while holding his life on his back, we can tell that our lead is a lower-class worker. The special sunglasses that Nada discovers reflect critical thinking and seeing what is truly there underneath what the oppressors that are revealed to be truly disgustingly ethereal aliens want the oppressed class to see, a pretty capitalist world that supports the rich. The quote posted on the slide from the Communist Manifesto is very important when it comes to the content in the film. Specifically, constant evolutionizing of production, uninterrupted disturbance of all social conditions. Within the plot of the film, we find that the oppressors have manufactured a reality that distracts the oppressed into seeing something false. After a great fight sequence, Nada and Frank, a black worker and later sidekick to Nada, come together to symbolize the oppressed class and the necessity of unifying in order to take back society from the oppressors. The film's main character struggles to get Frank to put the glasses on and see what he is seeing through the lenses. They fight for an absurd amount of time until Nada forcefully places them on Frank. Frank sees what's actually happening through the sunglasses and teams up with Nada. Both men of lower class are shown teaming up to unify against the oppressors. They Live has a distinct and unique style that intrigues the viewer with relatable and funny characters, overly acted out reactions, and ridiculous action sequences that seem to be pulled straight out of your dreams. This film, as well as others in the 80s, put an emphasis on the all-American man, tough, hardworking, and out for himself. An example of this would be Tom Cruise's character in the 1986 film Top Gun. Both exude rough, strong men that fight for their beliefs with America in mind.
Part C. Relation to the viewer and context. Experience of the viewer. The film depicts a working man on the road, working for his money. This is something that all of us can relate to and something that grabs our interest. The viewer is left in suspense throughout the entire movie, waiting to find out what happens next, which keeps people watching. They are waiting for answers to questions that were asked to the viewer in the film. Changing our point of view. The film asks many questions throughout, making the viewer wonder if they are just a pawn in the government's games as well, or if they are just blind to what is real. They Live explains to its audience not to believe everything you are told and to never stop questioning authority. The Communist Manifesto explains the upper and lower classes, being the bourgeoisie and proletariat. The Communist Manifesto states, the lower middle class, the small manufacturer, the shopkeeper, the artisan, the peasant, all these fight against the bourgeoisie to save from ruin their existence as fractions of the middle class. This quote from the Communist Manifesto is relevant to the movie They Live because both groups in the film, the upper class and the lower class, are constantly depicted fighting against each other. Bourgeoisie and proletariat. The bourgeoisie and proletariat are depicted throughout the film, showing us that not only is this film depicting these two groups, but it is also being reflected back onto the viewer. The viewer representing the proletariat and the makers of the film representing the bourgeoisie. The proletariat being the viewer, or the working man, watching and consuming the film for entertainment. The director, actors, and others that worked on the film being the bourgeoisie, who are wealthy upper class.
Okay, this is part D, media ideology. In this part, I want to discuss what the film actually has to say about society at large and media in particular, and I want to introduce the writings of Roland Barthes and Louis Althusser as a lens for analysis. So to introduce Barthes, the quote I've pulled is, "Myth is a system of communication. It is a message. This allows one to perceive that myth cannot possibly be an object, a concept, or an idea. It is a mode of signification." And that's from Mythologies, particularly the essay Myth Today. It has the idea that mythic communication is used in the film for purposes of control and domination. The messages of control used by the aliens are not overt or on the surface, but couched in mythic forms of communication. The aliens in the film, rather than conquering Earth through military might, instead fight on a psychological battlefield, trying to conquer the minds of the human race. They do this by appealing to the inherent desires of humanity, particularly those favored by Reagan-era America. The more overt messages of control are hidden within the language of media, particularly television and goods advertisements. Here is a typical example of a mythic sign, according to Barthes, that we find in the film. The actual sign is on the left. It contains connotations of beauty, desire, and escape. The subtlety of the ad is stripped away by the glasses that our main character wears, revealing the pure message no longer hidden behind the mirage of myth. Of interest here is that the true meaning is not necessarily tied 100% with the image displayed, as in just go on vacation and you'll be happy. Rather, it uses associations already present in the target society, which is our society. In this example, that's how vacations are desired by those who are hard workers and who have a family. These are the people who would desire vacations, and this is the kind of people that the aliens want to produce. Therefore, they're using the message of marry and reproduce hidden inside the idea of a vacation. The glasses in the film are a metaphor. They represent many things: education, critical thinking, really anything which can allow one to peer past the obfuscations of ideological apparatus. Those who lack these tools, such as education or critical thinking skills, they're often pulled under the sway of ideology. But if people have the means and the ability to pursue these tools, they can start to engage with ideology on its own terms. Now to introduce another thinker, we have Louis Althusser and his Ideology and Ideological State Apparatuses. The quote I've pulled for this is, "The individual is interpolated as a free subject in order that he shall submit freely to the commandments of the subject, i.e., in order that he shall freely accept his subjection." Much as myth, the mythic language that Barthes introduces to us, appeals to the desires of the target society and elevates itself above the particular, ideology, according to Althusser, appeals to the freedoms of the individual, a value which is often held above all others. And I think you find that if you take even a cursory glance at American society today. Those who are under the control of an ideological system do not believe themselves to be under any sort of control at all. This is a result of the form of such a system. I think an example of this principle at work in the film is the human collaborators who end up working with the aliens. There are those in the film who are made aware of the occupation and choose to aid it rather than fight it in exchange for wealth and preferential treatment. I think it's interesting that there's multiple forms of motivation for these people, noticeably greed, but also I think fear, a sort of fear that no matter what you do, there's no way you're going to be able to beat the occupiers, and that if you're going to have to deal with them in any terms, it might be on terms that benefit you in the short run. I think that is really a theme that we see, or we can at least apply to capitalists in today's society, where you can view them as kind of selling out the future in order to profit in the present. The drifter at the beginning of the film, who ends up being revealed as a collaborator, I think he's a very good example of this, where it basically tells the characters exactly what I just said, that you might as well live the high life in the meantime if there's no way you're going to be able to fight. He says the quote, "We all sell out every day," and I think that's something that is probably something that people hold on to today as well, but I also think is a false statement, a false tautology, much like the things we brought up in class, like boys will be boys. That's just the way things are. That's the way things always have been. It's a really great example of mythic speech as well. Those who recognize the system that they're operating within and the illusion of choice in the reality of control, those who see that and choose, rather than to give in, but choose to resist and to fight the status quo, they're met with the institutions of discipline, which are also a key part of the society of ideology. And as we see and as we know in real life, choosing to resist can be difficult, as it requires one to challenge every aspect of their lives and the workings of society. This is shown when our two main characters, Roddy Piper tries to show Frank the truth, but he instinctively, it seems, resists that knowledge because he knows that it's going to make the rest of his life difficult. He doesn't want to risk the things he does have, that he has in ignorance, to find the truth.